Well, good morning. Good to be with you today. As you may know, our focus educationally this Lent is Jesus. That's our Wednesday night forum, and also the book that we are reading is called Freeing Jesus. And so I wanted this morning to talk about the omniscience of Jesus, the all-knowing aspect of Jesus. And by omniscience, I'm not speaking solely about understanding, like Jesus understands more than we do. I'm speaking about an awareness that happens through relationship. Not an awareness of external things like a leaf falling, peripheral awareness, external awareness. I'm speaking about an awareness and an understanding of you. That Jesus is aware of our inner nature and sometimes our misguided nature, sometimes confused and seeking direction nature, or our stubborn and hurt and resisting nature. That Jesus' awareness of our inner self is greater than our own, because Jesus' love is greater than our own. Jesus is aware of you and is born out of that relationship and a love for you, and this is our gospel lesson. So let's jump in. Today's gospel story helps us to understand Jesus' accurate understanding of us. It's a story of the woman at the well. It's the fourth chapter of the Gospel of John. And I'm sorry that our lectionary cut off the verses at the beginning that set the context for this passage. And I want to just read those to you. It says, "Now when Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard Jesus is making and baptizing more disciples than John, although it was not John himself, but his disciples who baptized, he left Judea and started back to Galilee, but he had to go through Samaria. So he came to a Samaritan city called Sychar, near the plot of the ground that Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired out by his journey, was sitting by the well. It was about noon." Now, there are two important facts that I want you to hear in those verses. The first is that Jesus said he had to go through Samaria, or the text says Jesus had to go through Samaria. The second is that this encounter with the woman at the well was at noon. Now, when Jesus starts back to move from Jerusalem to Galilee, the text says, but he had to go through Samaria. And you might be thinking that that journey from Jerusalem to Galilee took him through the area of Samaria. And this is why I want to call this out, kind of like a halfway point, a rest stop. He was tired, so he stopped in Samaria. But Jesus had to go through Samaria. But Samaria is not on the way from Jerusalem to Galilee. In fact, it is out of the way. Imagine if the city of Austin is Jerusalem and Round Rock is Galilee, and the woman at the well event is happening in Bastrop. You do not have to travel through Bastrop to reach Round Rock. In fact, it's out of the way. For Jesus' disciples, they did not want to be in Samaria. This was a neighboring rival ethnic group, cousins of the Jews. The two groups had a certain tension about them, not a violent tension, kind of like what we see between Texas A&M and UT, or the Red Sox and the Yankees. The Jews and the Samaritans conflict was a religious one. By Jewish standards in Jesus' day, Samaritans were misguided at the least and religiously corrupt at the worst. Samaritans and Jews started out together in a common history, but separated around the placement of the temple, who had the cornerstone on God's home. Jesus arrives in the town of Sychar and goes and sits by the well while his disciples go off into town to get some food. It is noon. And along comes a woman at noon to collect water. She is by herself. If you were living at this time, you would have noticed something that was not right with this scene. Noon was not a time to collect water. The chore of collecting water was done at the beginning of the day, and it was done by the women of the village. They would do this chore together. It was relationship time. It was catching up time, checking in time. But this nameless woman is walking alone without the other women at noon. And we learn in our gospel lesson that she is a woman with a reputation. The other women saw her as a threat, a homewrecker. Our text explains her past. Jesus knows her past before she even tells him, and he says it very matter-of-factly. He says, "Go and call your husband and come back." And the woman answered, "I have no husband." And Jesus said to her, "You are right in saying I have no husband, for you have had 5 husbands, and the one that you are with now is not your husband." Jesus knows this woman already, although he has never met her before. He has gone out of his way for this exact person. The lost and the heartbroken, the scorned, and those who are filled with shame. Our text says, but he had to go through Samaria. He had to go because it was his mission. He had to go because this is Jesus' nature and the way of love. If you have ever thought that your life was on an orbit that was so far away from God that God could not even see you, I want you to remember this gospel lesson today. You are forgiven, and you are priceless in God's eyes. You are worthy in God's eyes. Jesus had to go through Samaria. This story is about forgiveness and mercy. So when the woman approaches the well, Jesus says to her, "Give me something to drink." Now, I've read enough of John's gospel to know that conversations that Jesus is having with someone else are rarely about what the particular thing is that they're involved in. You know, the words of the present situation are used to talk about something far more important. Jesus was an able-bodied man. He can get the water for himself. He wasn't injured. He wasn't even supposed to be talking to this woman. "Give me something to drink." This was not a conversation about H2O. Jesus has just given voice to her heart. "Give me something to drink." A heart that she had had to ignore in her unsuccessful relationships. A heart that she has stuffed so she doesn't feel the painful jeers of the other women in the town. A heart that no longer knew dignity and worth. The text isn't clear about what the cause of her previous 5 relationships were, but I have no problem suggesting that she was the scapegoat for those broken relationships, just as she was receiving the despising looks from others in the town. Her reputation was in question years ago. What sense of worth could she carry? The world was telling her she had no value. And Jesus says what her heart would have said in that moment, "Give me something to drink. I have been without love most of my life. My sense of self-image is so distorted, so misinformed, I am dying for thirst," her heart would say. Jesus says to her, "Everyone who drinks this water that I will give," or that this water will be thirsty again, "but those who drink the water that I will give them will never be thirsty. The water that I will give will become in them a spring of water gushing up to eternal life." And the woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water." This is a story of forgiveness and love and reconciliation. Jesus didn't need to be there. God does not have to be merciful and forgiving Jesus knew exactly who he would find at the well at noon. He was there for her, and Jesus is here for you. Brene Brown, a well-known author and Texan, said at a conference I attended years ago that the work of the church is to move people from shame to guilt. That shame is a response to something that we have done, a sin, and our conclusion is that we are bad because of what we have done. We are ashamed. Your guilt is a response to an act we have committed for which we've done harm, but we don't feel that we ourselves are bad. In fact, we are created good. We are loved. We have worth. How many of us, or how many moments, do we fall into that trap of letting our guilt and remorse turn into shame? Our sense of worth becomes a feeling of unworthiness. There is not one among us who has not committed a sin. Our gospel lesson reminds us that we are not forsaken, we are loved. Jesus seeks us out and loves us just as he loved the woman at the well, truly all the way into her heart's deepest wound. John's gospel today is teaching us something about the nature of God and God's love that may be new to us. Take it in. You are loved and you are forgiven. Let me go back to what I was saying at the beginning of this sermon. Jesus understands more than we do. He is omniscient, all-knowing. This awareness happens through his relationship with us, not an external awareness like a falling leaf, a peripheral awareness, an external awareness. I'm speaking about an awareness and an understanding of you. That Jesus is aware of our inner nature, our sometimes misguided nature, sometimes confused and seeking direction nature, or sometimes our stubborn and hurt and resisting nature. That Jesus' awareness of our inner self is greater than even our own because Jesus' love is greater than ours. Now, knowing what I know about the spiritual life, the way we understand God's ways is to imitate God's ways. This being true, today's gospel lesson is about mercy, God's unconditional love and merciful love for us. How might we share that experience of mercy with others? And this falls into the category of homework for you this week. You may have noticed the length of our gospel lesson, right? It's going on for a while. Up my leg, can I sit down yet? And it could have been told more succinctly. But in moments of forgiveness, when we experience merciful love, our experience is that we are all that matters. Time stops, and it's a moment that changes and renews and reimagines our life. As we have experienced the merciful love of God, it is important that we share that gift with others. What happens to this woman at the well and to us is that merciful love allows us to reimagine our lives. No longer do we carry the weight of unworthiness and live from an unworthy mindset, but we begin to see our own lives anew. Christ invites us to live into the newness of our lives that result from his forgiving love for us. So I want to invite you this week to give another person the gift of your time, as Jesus did to the woman at the well. The length of our lesson is no accident. It's instructive. This person that you give your time to will immediately know that they matter and that they are not forsaken. They can know themselves in a new way because they have experienced of worth that you have given them. And now, a bit less burdened, they can walk forward in a new way. God's love is a merciful love. So let us share with others the blessing of the new life that comes with God's forgiving love. Amen.